1964 Equal Opportunity Act and How Diversity Affected the Workforce by Sibtain Jagani for the Human Resource Management class. This is a table of contents slide which indicates the content of the presentation. The first slide was title page. This slide, the second one is table of contents. The next will be introduction, followed with purpose, definitions, hypotheses, literature, pros and cons, test and survey, methodology, questions, results, conclusion, and references. Introduction. Equal Opportunity Act of 1964 was one of the keystone legislations that changed the culture and society in an unprecedented manner. It was just not an ordinary act or legislation, but it was actually a comprehensive effort to tackle discrimination, racism, poverty in the society at the time. The changes in the society were not immediate, but it slowly impacted the society and diversity in the workplace. Equal Opportunity Act was a result of protests and turbulence in the 1950s. The act demanded an equal opportunity to all and demanded decisions to be made on merits rather than race, color, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation. Equal Opportunity Act was a broad concept that required employers to make employment decisions rather objectively. Why it is important to talk about these things. First of all, equal employment opportunity, business necessity, job relatedness, bona fide occupational qualification, burden of proof, non-retaliatory practices, and these things will be defined further in the definition sections as we move along. Before we look into the definitions of the important terms, let's talk about the purpose that the presenter has. Presenter or researcher goal in this assignment is to research on 1964 Equal Opportunity Act and how diversity affected the workforce. And also, the presenter is interested in finding out the political and social implications and impacts on the corporate culture of the past, current, and possibly the future. The first term that we have here is diversity. And according to dictionary.com, that means the inclusion of individuals representing more than one national origin, culture, religion, socioeconomic, and sexual orientation. Protected characteristic, this can be described as an attribute about an individual that is protected under the equal opportunity laws and regulations. The next term that we have is the equal employment opportunity, which basically means employment that is not affected by illegal discrimination on the basis of race, religion, gender, and etc. Status blind. This can be defined as a concept that emphasizes that differences among people should be ignored and everyone should be treated equal at all times. Disparate treatment, it occurs when members of a certain group are treated differently from other people. On this next slide, definitions continue. Disparate impact, and this can be defined when members of a protected category are grossly underrepresented as a result of employment decisions that work to their disadvantage. Business necessity is the other term, which is basically precautionary or steps taken by the organization for safe operations. Bona fide occupational, it can be defined as a characteristic providing a legitimate reason why an employer can exclude people. Discrimination, which is a term that we hear all the time, and per dictionary.com, it can be defined as treatment or consideration of or making a distinction in favor of or against a person or thing based on the group, class, or category to which that person or thing belongs, rather than on individual merit. Burden of proof. Generally, people who file suit against somebody, like an organization, must prove illegal discrimination or any wrongdoing. Retaliation, basically, it is a revenge by corporations, which often results in punitive damages against people who sued the organization in the first place. Glass ceiling, this is a practice that have prevented women and minorities from advancing to high-paying jobs. Basically, an intentional act that would discourage or prevent for people to move forward. Affirmative action, it is an act of fixing the century-long discrimination by providing opportunities. Is basically an act that would try to restore some sort of balance to a very imbalanced structure. The presenter does have some hypotheses. The first one is the 1964 Equal Opportunity Act has increased diversity in most fields for generally all minorities. Hypotheses second would be current human resources and legal system considers diversity in the workplace as an important legal and social issue. The third hypothesis that the presenter has is diversity has made a positive impact in the workplace and society. Before the 1964 Equal Opportunity Act, the workplace was very segregated, and women were very minimal in the workforce. Women and minorities were not only underrepresented in the workforce, but they were also confined to a gender-specific and entry-level positions, for example, such as secretaries, janitorial services, and clerks. They were not allowed to move forward in managerial positions. Also, due to the 1964 Equal Opportunity Act, the discussion of institutional racism and discrimination was all out in the open. 2007 study conducted by the Equal Opportunity Commission found that due to the act and the enforcement of it, 20% of minorities were in managerial positions as compared to 1%, which is quite low in the 1960s. So as we do see that the act made some improvement in terms of minorities moving forward towards managerial positions. It's of course not where that we would prefer, but it definitely has made some improvement. The other thing that I would like to mention is in the 60s and the early 70s, labor force participation for African American was 60%, but it was mainly in low wages area. Now it is 66% participation, but they're definitely holding higher income positions as compared into the 1960s. You may notice that it's just 6% increase from the 1960s to the recent from 60 to 66%, and mainly the research stated that due to recession and the reason for improvement in the area of diversity in recent decade is because due to the Act of 64, it required all employers to stop discriminating. It was a formal law that basically prohibited from employers to discriminate on the basis of race, religion, or sexual orientation. Not only that, but the clear guidelines were given by the government to all employers about potential legal proceedings against, of course, who will fail to follow. According to a study from the Bureau of National Affairs, more than 80% of the large firms had equal employment policies, which, of course, did not exist in the 1960s or before that. It is important to note that the 1964 Equal Opportunity Act also established affirmative action policies, which helped to promote diversity in the workplace. Diversity not impacted just the workplace, but also in the government. Research has shown about 38% racial minorities, which consists of African American, Hispanics, and others. Nowadays, diversity initiatives, programs, and concepts are common in the workplace, but the term diversity is almost never defined completely and successfully. And the reason for it is because the culture and society keeps evolving, hence it broadens and evolves the definition and criteria of it as very well. But generally, or arguably, all this diversity translates into inclusiveness and collaboration of people and ideas of diverse backgrounds. The presenter at this time would also like to point out that diversity of an affirmative action is not the same, nor it can be used interchangeably. It is also important to note that affirmative action came into effect to undo the wrongdoing and to restore some sort of balance to an imbalanced system. And it's important to note that affirmative action is a remedial, and by law it has been imposed on the public institutions and organizations. Diversity, on the other hand, is quite voluntary or deliberate to provide benefits to an organization. Due to the Equal Opportunity Act, diversity provided tangible benefits to organizations such as change in race, gender, and religion. Corporations were able to enter a diverse and broader base of clientele that was not accessible before the Opportunity Act. Broader clientele encompassed of all sorts of people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, and with diverse workforce, it allowed organizations to succeed with different segments of the populations. Hence, it means, of course, more profits. It is imperative to note that the Act came into effect to rectify the unjust practices from the Jim Crow era. Diversity also became a very important issue and focal point in the 50s and the 60s because of the racial tension at the time, and movement of equality and justice was going extremely strong. Also, it was important for the corporate world, and not all the organizations, but for most of them. It was compelling to not only embrace the diverse society, but diverse consumers that came along with it to prosper in an unprecedented manner. After the act was drafted, the major difference at this time was the implementation and the enforcement of it. It prohibited corporations and government agencies from discriminating on the account of race and gender. Not only that, but the Committee on Equal Employment Opportunity was established to substantiate the efforts to enforce the Equal Employment Opportunity Act. In the years to come, the legislation helped diversity because it forced the employers to not discriminate against racial minorities, which again restored some sort of balance to the workforce. In the years to come, the Equal Employment Opportunity Act became a driving force in the workplace to promote diversity in all types of professions and organizations. During the researcher found that some employers, especially Ford Motor Company, is considered as a pioneer in promoting diversity and equality. Based on the Equal Employment Opportunity Act .gov data, Henry Ford offered to pay attractive pay to get thousands of immigrants and other minorities, which in return not only helped Ford Motors to expand, but also it strengthened the American middle class. It is important to note that this was just not a change in the workplace, but it was actually a social and a political movement that was changing the culture of America at the time. That in return changed the dynamics and the fabrics of the society. At this time, the presenter would like to mention some of the pros and cons to the act and diversity in general. Presenter was surprised to find out that there were some cons to the concept of diversity, which I thought was quite interesting, which we will discuss here shortly. But one of the pros to diversity is innovation. People from different backgrounds and cultures often do not think alike, and different thinking enables and encourages outside the box thinking, which in return, fuels innovation. The other thing is talent pools. Diversity helps to provide a wider selection of people with different skill sets and ideas. The other pro is definitely profit, and a diverse workforce is healthy for the financial health of an organization. It allows for companies to penetrate in a diverse consumer markets, and that allows, of course, more profits. Better understanding. Diverse workforce also forces people to interact, which enables to a better understanding of each other's culture, language, and religion. Not only the understanding helps team cohesion, but also promotes tolerance and respect for each other. As a presenter mentioned earlier, that there were some cons to the concept of diversity, and a couple of the cons that the presenter found through the research was quite often there are conflicts because the people are different. They're in a challenging situations, and sometimes in a difficult situations, the conflict can be extreme. Also, people sometimes can be confused or threatened by people who are different than them. This can also lead, conflict is never good, of course. It leads to quite often unproductivity, which of course can result into losses for companies in lost time and in loss of revenue. At this time, the presenter would like to discuss a test or a survey that was conducted by the presenter. as a manager at a local law firm. And the brief survey was to provide um, quantifiable research to the overall presentation about people's input on diversity in the workplace. The methodology was quite simple. It was to ask a dozen employees at the firm of different ethnicities, gender, and religion to answer a few questions and how diversity is impacted and if it is important or not. Survey on average took 5 minutes or less, and it was sent via email to expedite it. Survey measured on a 5-point scale, 1 being strongly disagree and 5 being strongly agreed. The questions that were asked in the survey were 4 of them, and the first one was, do you believe that diversity in the workplace helps people in the organization? Do you believe that diversity has made a positive impact? Do you believe that corporations and legal systems take diversity and unfair practices of discrimination very seriously? And the last one was, do you believe, based on what you have read, heard, and maybe experienced firsthand, that Equal Employment Opportunity Act was beneficial for the society and the American workplace? Now, the results were quite surprising in a way because all surveys that were sent out were completed. So 100% participation rate. It was a small pool. That could be the reason. Majority of the participants responded to agree to strongly agree on questions from on 1, 2, and 3. It appears that a couple of participants struggled with the final question. One participant left it blank, and the other one chose neutral. Besides that, majority of the participants selected agree for the question. Based upon the results of the literature review and the survey conducted, the hypotheses number 1 was 1964 Equal Opportunity Act has increased diversity in most fields for generally all minorities. The second hypothesis was current day human resources and the legal system considers diversity in the workforce as an important legal and social issue. And the third hypothesis was diversity has made a positive impact in the workplace and society. All the hypotheses were validated by the participants in the survey. The research material found by the presenter strongly validates the survey results. It is imperative to note that the research and survey results debunks the negative impacts of diversity argued by few experts that were found during the research. Criticism on the presenter's research and methodology. The few criticisms that can be argued on the presenter's research and methodology are that the survey participant pool was very small, hence may not represent the true opinion of the general population. The sample size was small as compared to regular research that may be done with a broader pool size. Survey participants may have randomly selected an option to complete the survey in order not to offend the presenter, which happens to be their manager. Survey also does not convey the full picture because it was not a random selection. It was done arguably in a controlled setting. The presenter's perspective on this one is based on the research that the presenter has conducted along with the brief survey in which a few people from the American workplace have participated. The research and survey affirms that the Equal Opportunity Act immensely helped to reshape the landscape of the corporate world. Concepts such as affirmative action and fair hiring practices benefited the American people by strengthening the middle class, as it was shown in the presentation earlier by the Henry Ford example, that it strengthened the middle class by providing higher wages and hiring people who may not have been hired due to the discrimination and racism at the time. Also, it is important to note that Equal Opportunity Act, along with the other political social activities in the 50s and the 60s, helped the legislation to be implemented. Due to the implementation of such legislation, it forced companies to hire people from diverse backgrounds, which eventually affected diversity in the workplace, short term and long term, because the laws were still enforced and they got even stronger as the time passed. In conclusion, the presenter research, along with the literature review, it is apparent that the Equal Opportunity Act was a major milestone in promoting and affecting the diversity in the workplace in a major way. This presenter's hypotheses were confirmed by the survey results, and it debunked any notion or notions of the detractors of the act or theory. The presenter strongly believes that diversity is a vital part of any society, and it can be extremely instrumental in order to achieve personal and organizational success. At the end, the presenter would like to discuss the references slides. As you may see that the peer-reviewed journals were used along with dictionary.com, as we defined a couple of terms in the presentation. Um, it is important to note that these sources were academic journals, and were not just opinions by ordinary people. Also, the textbook of the course was used as one of the sources of citation, along with a couple of other articles and journals that were used to explain the political and social situation and how diversity was raised as a question not only in the American workforce, but also um, diversity and equality and justice for people in regular setting as well. I appreciate for my classmates and my professor to listen to my presentation. Thank you for your time.